Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me today at this important conference in your lovely country, India. My name is Hilal Akdeniz and I'm a researcher at the Foundation for Dialogue and Education in Berlin. Actually, I'm working on my PhD at the Goethe University in Frankfurt. Today, I would like to speak about biographical ruptures and identity transformations after a failed coup attempt of July 15th in 2016 in Turkey, and more specifically about how individuals affiliate with the Hizmet movement narrate persecution, exile, and reorientation across transnational contexts. This presentation is part of my ongoing doctoral research in sociology, so based on 20 biographical narrative interviews, and I will present interim results. Let me begin with a sentence from one of my interviewees. Overnight, I became a traitor in my own country. Similar sentences I heard from so many interviews, so this is not in one case, many of them felt similar. This sentence does not only describe a political accusation, it describes a biographical rupture. Within days, individuals who had perceived themselves as educators, civil servants, or engaged professionals were redefined as security threats. The rupture was abrupt, it was existential, and it reshaped entire life trajectories. On the night of July 15, 2016, a faction within the Turkish military attempted to overthrow the government. The attempt failed. According to official figures, approximately 250 to 265 people were killed that night, and more than 2,000 were injured. The event marked a moment of profound collective shock. What followed was a prolonged state of emergency that lasted 2 years. In the aftermath, at least 77,000 people were formally arrested in the first 2 years. You can imagine, actually we have 9 years after this date, and this number is really increasing huge. Around 130,000 public servants were dismissed or suspended from their positions. Hundreds of thousands were investigated on terrorism-related charges. Since 2016, estimates suggest that up to 500,000 individuals have been detained at some point in connection with these investigations. After 9 years, the AKP government is still blocking an independent commission investigation into the events of the night of the coup. There's no evidence to prove who was actually responsible for this terrible act. In addition, large numbers of citizens left the country, including academics, professionals, civil servants, and entire families, reshaping Turkish diasporic landscapes across Europe and North America. For many of my interviewees, this period marks a decisive biographical rupture. My central research question is, how do politically persecuted, upwardly mobile individuals affiliated with the Hizmet movement narrate rupture, loss, and reorientation across transnational spaces? I am less concerned with reconstructing political events themselves and more with understanding how individuals process with these events biographically. Let me show you my methodology. This study is based on 20 biographical narrative interviews, as I told, and these are conducted in transnational contexts. Following the methodological approach of biographical process analysis, interviews begin with an open narrative invitation, allowing participants to structure their life stories according to their own internal relevance. These analyses focus on trajectories of suffering, moments of collapse, and attempts at narrative restabilization. This project is ongoing, and the findings I present today are preliminary. My sample is, I would say, quite interesting, still interesting after a few years. Most participants in my sample share several characteristics. They originate from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, and they experience upward mobility through education. You could call it also a transformation. Their educational and civic biographies were shaped with religious, ethical commitments. Before 2016, many held respected professional positions, and after 2016, many experienced professional dismissal, financial ruin, and social delegitimation, and eventual also exile. Now let me show you my analytical findings. So the first key finding is that post-2016 period is narrated not simply as political repression, but as total biographical collapse. Participants describe sudden job loss, frozen bank accounts, revoked passports, social distancing, and profound uncertainty. Within weeks, stable middle-class lives turned into precarity. Several described and the experiences as the form of social death. Importantly, this collapse was experienced not only as institutional punishment, but as moral delegitimation. The second finding concerns ostracism. Exclusion operated on multiple levels. There was legal prosecution by state institutions, there was public stigmatization, there was distancing by colleagues, and in some cases even silence or rupture within extended family networks. This created a condition of relational isolation. The loss was not only economic, it was social, symbolic, and deeply personal. Many interviewees reported on their role as role models for citizens. They said that they had gone to the police stations on their own initiative, assuming that there must have been some misunderstanding when they learned that they were wanted. None of them had anything to do with the coup. While in pretorial detention and during their subsequent prison sentences, they experienced traumatic, deeply degrading treatment and in some cases torture. Filled with shame, they confided their stories to me. They said, quote, "Something like this must never happen again. I want my story to be scientifically documented and to bear witness to this terrible act." Quote end. They entrusted me with their life stories. One of the most striking findings is what is absent. Across 20 interviews, I did not encounter narratives of revenge or violent retaliation. Despite severe repression, there were no expressed desires of vengeance. Instead, I encountered grief, ethical reflection, theological questioning, and self-critique. Some participants critically reassessed internal structures of the movement. Others reflected on their own political assumptions. Rather than radicalization, repression appears to have intensified moral reflexivity. This challenges simplified assumptions that political persecution inevitably produce violent counter-identities. However, hope remains present. but it is relocated. Many participants do not imagine rebuilding their futures in Turkey. Instead, hope is projected into transnational space, into new educational opportunities, new civic participation, new beginnings elsewhere. This relocation of hope signals a profound transformation of belonging. Home becomes less a territorial certainty and more a negotiated transnational construction. So what does this contribute sociologically? First, it refines our understanding of trajectories of suffering under contemporary state repression. Second, it highlights the centrality of narrative identity work when institutional recognition collapses. Third, it complicates linear models linking repression to radicalization. And finally, it shows how exile becomes a site of repositioning, morally, socially, and existentially. Let me conclude with this. The individuals in this study experience financial destruction, social exclusion, legal insecurity, and forced migration within a broader landscape in which hundreds of thousands were investigated, detained, or dismissed. Yes, yet we stand out in their narratives is not hatred. It is the struggle to maintain moral coherence under conditions of delegitimation. Political repressions does not automatically produce extremism. It produces complex process of biographic reconfiguration marked by suffering, reflexivity, and difficult reconstruction of agency in exile. Thank you for your attention.